The forgotten temple in the jungle. The jungle has a way of swallowing you whole. Not just physically, but mentally. The oppressive heat, the endless cacophony of insects, the dense canopy that filters the sunlight into a dim green glow, all of it feels like the jungle is alive, watching, waiting for you to stumble. I learned this the hard way when I found myself lost in the middle of nowhere, armed with nothing but my camera, a half-empty water bottle, and a navy sense of adventure. I had come to South America chasing rumors. Whispers of a forgotten temple deep within the jungle, a place where locals refused to tread. They called it El Templo Olvidado. Supposedly, it was the site of ancient rituals long before the Spanish arrived. But what intrigued me most was the stories of its cursed travelers claimed to have stumbled upon it, only to return with horrifying tales, or not return at all. It sounded like clickbait for my photography blog. The journey started innocently enough. A narrow dirt path led me into the jungle, marked by bright flowers and the occasional scurrying monkey. But the further I walked, the less distinct the trail became. Hours turned into a day, my GPS lost signal, and my water supply dwindled alarmingly fast. At some point, I stopped to rest beneath a massive kapok tree, its roots sprawling like tentacles. That's when I saw it. A flicker of something unnatural through the trees. A straight line where there should have been only chaos. Intrigued, I pushed through the underbrush, ignoring the scrapes and bites from unseen assailants. My breath caught when I finally broke through the foliage. There it was. The temple rose before me like a jagged tooth, its weathered stone darkened by centuries of rain and moss. It was small compared to other ruins I'd seen, but its isolation gave it an air of majesty. Unlike the Mayan or Aztec structures, this temple seemed devoid of human artistry. There were no carved deities, no glyphs, only raw, unpolished stone, stacked into a steep pyramid. A single yawning entrance gaped at its base, flanked by crumbling pillars. Despite the midday heat, the air around the temple was cool, too cool. The jungle noises, chirping birds. The distant growl of a jaguar had vanished. Even the insects seemed to avoid the clearing. The silence was suffocating. I don't know why I didn't turn back right then. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe arrogance, or maybe the temple itself had already sunk its claws into me. I stepped closer. The stones radiated a subtle vibration beneath my boots. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but the ground wasn't moving. The vibrations felt more like a low hum, like the temple was breathing. My camera trembled in my hands as I snapped a few pictures, each click echoing too loudly in the still air. I couldn't resist the urge to go inside. The entrance was pitch black, a stark contrast to the dim green light outside. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, revealing narrow walls that seemed to press inward. The air smelled ancient, a mix of damp earth and something metallic. Each step I took sent a faint echo bouncing into the void ahead. The first chamber was unremarkable, just an empty room with walls etched by time. But as I ventured deeper, I began to notice patterns in the stonework. Subtle grooves spiraled across the walls and floor, converging in strange geometric designs that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The second chamber was where things started to feel wrong. At its center stood an altar, little more than a slab of stone, yet its surface was disturbingly smooth, as though polished by countless hands. Above it hung something that froze me in place. A figure carved from obsidian, suspended by ropes of twisted vine. It was humanoid, but grotesquely distorted. Its limbs were too long, its face a void where features should have been. The craftsmanship was impeccable, almost too lifelike. As I circled the altar, my flashlight beam caught something carved into the base, a single spiral, the same shape I'd seen on the walls. I reached out to touch the stone. The moment my fingers brushed its surface, a sound cut through the silence, a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The figure above the altar trembled, its ropes swaying despite the still air. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest, in my teeth, until I stumbled back, clutching my ears. And then it stopped. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It was heavier, charged with something unexplainable. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The spiral on the altar seemed to pulse faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a heartbeat. Something moved behind me. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the chamber. Nothing. Just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded hollow. Turning back to the altar, I saw the spiral had changed. It now extended beyond the altar, faintly glowing as it spiraled outward along the floor, toward the walls, toward me. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned and ran, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly. The vibrations in the ground had returned, stronger than before. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker, as though the temple itself was trying to hold me. When I burst out into the clearing, the jungle felt suffocatingly bright, the noise of insects and birds deafening. But it was the shadows that caught my attention. The sunlight cast my shadow onto the ground, but something was wrong. It was too long, too distorted. As I moved, it lagged behind, as though reluctant to follow. I bolted back into the jungle, leaves and branches tearing at my skin. I didn't stop until I found the dirt path, if it was even the same one. My shadow remained wrong, flickering at the edges, shifting in ways I couldn't explain. By the time I reached the edge of the jungle, the sun was setting, and my shadow seemed to melt into the growing darkness. I dared to glance back once. The temple was nowhere in sight, but the jungle felt alive, its green canopy watching, waiting. It wasn't until I reached the safety of my hotel room that I noticed the spiral on my palm. I tried scrubbing it off. Soap, water, even alcohol, it didn't matter. The faint spiral on my palm wouldn't fade. It wasn't ink, nor a bruise. It looked like it was etched into my skin. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, that I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew better. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the temple pressing on my thoughts, its dark halls curling around my mind like vines. When I finally drifted off, the dreams came. I was back in the jungle, but everything was wrong. The trees bent at unnatural angles, their trunks twisted like corkscrews. The ground was soft and pulsing beneath my feet, as if alive. And in the distance, the temple rose, more massive and menacing than before. The hum returned, vibrating through my chest, accompanied by a chorus of whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I woke drenched in sweat, the faint sound of the hum lingering in my ears. My hand throbbed where the spiral marked me. The days that followed blurred together. The world outside felt off-kilter, as though reality itself was slightly misaligned. Shadows didn't behave as they should. I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. The spiral on my hand grew darker, its edges more defined. I became obsessed with the temple. Every search I conducted led to dead ends. No maps marked its location, no articles referenced its existence. Even locals refused to speak of it. They'd shake their heads, their eyes clouded with fear, muttering prayers under their breath. I started having blackouts. At first, they lasted seconds, moments, where I'd find myself standing in the middle of a room with no memory of how I got there. Then they stretched into minutes, hours. Once, I woke up in the jungle, miles from my hotel, with no recollection of how I'd arrived. The spiral on my hand burned, its lines glowing faintly in the moonlight. I tried leaving. A one-way ticket back home seemed like the only logical solution. But something always went wrong. Missed flights, sudden illnesses, inexplicable delays. It was as if the temple was calling me back, refusing to let me go. And eventually, I gave in. The second journey into the jungle felt different. The trail I'd once struggled to find seemed to guide me now, the underbrush parting effortlessly. The jungle noises faded as I neared the clearing, replaced by that familiar hum. The temple looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. The air around it was heavier, charged with a palpable energy. My shadow stretched unnaturally long behind me, flickering at the edges. This time, the entrance welcomed me. The dark halls felt less oppressive, the spirals on the walls almost comforting. The deeper I ventured, the louder the hum grew, resonating through my bones. The second chamber was no longer empty. The obsidian figure was gone, replaced by something far worse. A pool of liquid, black and shimmering, occupied the center of the room. It reflected no light, its surface unnervingly still. The spirals on the walls converged above it, forming a vast, intricate pattern that seemed to writhe when I looked too long. Kneeling at its edge, I saw my reflection, or what should have been my reflection. The face staring back was mine, but its expression wasn't. It smiled as I frowned, blinked when I didn't. My shadow stretched into the pool, merging with the darkness. I was drawn to the pool. The hum grew deafening. The pool rippled, and something began to rise. It was the figure from before, but now it moved with purpose. Its elongated limbs unfolded with unnatural grace, its featureless face tilting toward me. The spiral on my hand burned white-hot, and I couldn't move.